Welcome back to Red Sea Rules. And today we're going to learn Red Sea Rule number 4. You're going to love this rule. It's the easiest one to memorize because it's only one word. I think most of us can handle this. Only one word. However, Red Sea Rule number 4 may be the most challenging of all of the rules, at least in the way we are going to learn it today. So let's learn. You ready? Red Sea Rule number 4. All right, we're going to say it together. We've got this on the screen. Red Sea Rule number 4 is? Pray. Let's say that again. Red Sea Rule number 4 is? Pray. Okay, turn the screen off. Okay, we're going to practice. Red Sea Rule number 4? Pray. Oh, you got it. Good. See, and some of you said, I just can't memorize anything. Last week, you will remember, we left Moses and the Israelites at a place called Pi Hahiroth. I've actually been to Pi Hahiroth. Matter of fact, several times in my life I have been there. And so have you. You've actually been there. You just didn't know what to call it. Let me explain. Pi Hahiroth was the last place the Israelites camped before the parting of the Red Sea and going through. This was the place where Pharaoh and his army of chariots had the Israelites trapped with absolutely no way of escape. They, as we have been saying, were caught between a rock and a wet place. Yeah, you got that down. So let me ask you, in your life, have you ever been trapped by circumstances beyond your control with no way of escape? See, you have been to Pi Hahiroth. You just didn't know what to call it at the time. You've been there. And you certainly know what it feels like to be caught and trapped with no way of escape. How should we, as Christ followers, respond and react when we find ourselves caught between a rock and a wet place? How should we respond? Well, how did the Israelites respond? How do you think they're going to respond? Well, this morning I have good news and bad news. And we're going to look at the good news and bad news of their response and talk about it throughout the morning. But let me read to you Exodus 14, verses 10 through 12. They realize they're trapped, and here's what the text says. Exodus 14, verse 10. As Pharaoh approached, now remember, when it says Pharaoh, it's not just Pharaoh, it's his army of chariots. The Israelites looked up, and there were the Egyptians marching after them. They were terrified and cried out to the Lord. And they said to Moses, was it because there were no graves in Egypt that you brought us to the desert to die? What have you done to us by bringing us out of Egypt? Didn't we say to you in Egypt, leave us alone, let us serve the Egyptians? It would have been better for us to serve the Egyptians than to die in the desert. All right, let's back up now. We're going to take a closer look at their response, really for one reason, not just so we can learn a little tidbit of history. I want us to learn from their example. So we're going to learn today, how do you pray, because that's Red Sea Rule number 4, is pray. How do you pray when you are in the middle of a Red Sea crisis, trapped, no way of escape? Let's see what we can learn from the Israelites. All right, are you ready? Number 1. Here's the first challenge. Don't be afraid to be afraid. Don't be afraid to be afraid. As we just read, when the Israelites looked up and saw their predicament, they responded. Notice carefully, though, their response. Notice it doesn't say, they looked up and they were startled. Did you notice that? They looked up and they were concerned. They looked up and they called a meeting to discuss options. No, what does it say? They looked up. They were terrified. Terrified. Now, what does this initial response tell us about the Israelites? Get ready, here it is. It tells us the Israelites were normal. They were normal. God created every one of us with a very helpful, a very beneficial emotion called fear. Fear. It can be one of your best friends. It can be a great motivator to get yourself and others out of danger. I mean, think back, fear will keep you from playing in the street, right? Fear will keep you from picking up a hot pan with both hands off of the stove. Fear will keep you from taking your screwdriver and sticking it into a light socket. Fear is a great motivator. So, we got to get this down. We got to get it in our minds and never forget it in your notes. It is normal to be afraid and to honestly face our trials. Very normal. In fact, psychologists have a word to describe people who are never afraid. Dead. That's the word, dead. Yeah, you're going to be dead if you have no fear. Now, we're not talking about living in a constant state of fear. We're not talking about paranoia. Being paranoid when you're in a crisis and you just freak out, you let fear control your life, what happens? You just get paralyzed. You can't move. You don't know what to do, and you're just stuck, and you just let that fear, instead of motivate you, it will paralyze you. Now, the other side of the coin is just as bad, and that is living in denial. When you're in a fearful situation, it is very unhealthy to say, I am not experiencing a Red Sea trial. My life is perfect, I have no problems. And if I say this loud enough and long enough, then this trial will go away. Living in denial is not the answer either. 1 year ago today, I was recovering from major back surgery. I remember before the surgery, my neurosurgeon's assistant called Mary and I into a room and explained to me what they were going to do. And she said, now, Rick, one thing you need to understand about this surgery, you're going to be in the hospital 3 to 4 days, and you're going to feel like a truck hit you. You know, after the surgery, 4 days in, I realized she was not speaking metaphorically. She meant that you will literally feel like a truck ran over you. Before the surgery, when she called me in, she said, oh, by the way, I just happen to have an acrylic model of the 2 titanium rods and 6 screws we're going to put in your back. Now, in my mind, guys, I'm envisioning like little rods like about the size of toothpicks and the little bitty tiny screws like you put in your eyeglasses. Mary took a picture of the model, and I don't know how well we'll be able to see it on the screen, but let's pop it up. This is a model. Now, the acrylic part, that would be your backbone and all your bone structure. But you see kind of at the top up there's a rod on the left and a rod on the right. And you see there's 6 screws. And she explained to me, this is what we're going to do. And I said, wait a minute, this looks like what would go under the hood of my car. Maybe some kind of suspension, in my back. You're going to put that in my back. Now, I want you to know, okay, that's enough. I get wheezy when I look at that picture. I want you to know, when I saw that model and she explained to me what they were going to do, I felt this thing in the pit of my stomach called fear. Man, it was like, I would like to volunteer someone else for this. I was afraid, very much so. But I want you to know what happened was the good part. I had that initial normal fear, And it was real. But I was able, by the grace of God, not to let that fear control me so that I am paranoid and run out the back door, or that I leave in denial saying, well, I really don't have a back problem. No, I was able to let that normal fear motivate me and lead me to do what I didn't want to have done, but I'm glad I had done, and that is have major back surgery and get hit with a truck and feel like it for 4 or 5 days. Now, so a year ago, right now, I'm really doing great. I'm finally able to stand up preaching. You know, I used to have to sit in a stool to preach for about a year because of my back. I'm doing great, and recovery's going well. I go into my regular primary physician, doctor, Dr. Martinez, and he always sits right over here, second service. So I went in for this is my regular exam and doing all the blood work and all that. And so I'm talking to Dr. Martinez, and he said, you know, Rick, I'm a little concerned about your PSA. It went up just a little bit, not a lot, but I'm just a little concerned. And the PSA, by the way, that's the test that you use for prostate cancer. You watch that if it elevates real quick. And so he said, I'm concerned. And I said, well, I'm not. And he said, well, I am. And he said, I want you to go see Dr. Bishop, urologist. So I make an appointment to go see Dr. Bishop, who always sits right over here, second service. I'm telling you, I'm covered. I'm covered. I'm a little worried it's first service, but second service, I'm covered. So I go see Dr. Bishop, and he examined me. He said, yeah, I'm a little concerned too. We better do a biopsy, which I was really thrilled about. And so they did a biopsy, and what they do 12 needle biopsies, run a test. And so I'm at home about 3 days later, and I get a call, and it's Dr. Bishop. And he said, Rick, got the results back. 11 of the 12 needle biopsies came out negative. I said, 11 out of he said, yeah, I got bad news. One of the needle biopsies showed that you have prostate cancer. Now, many of you in this room know what I'm talking about. When the doctor uses the C word, what happens? Man, right here, I felt the fear of God. You get the fear of God when you hear the C word. And so you got prostate cancer. Now, my problem was I knew a lot about prostate cancer because my father died of prostate cancer. My older brother survived prostate cancer. And so now I'm next in line. And man, I'm sitting there on the phone talking to Dr. Bishop, or rather listening to Dr. Bishop, and just feeling that fear hit me again, like, you gotta be kidding. I'm finally up walking, and now I have to go back through another surgery. Now, so what did I do? Rather than allow that fear to control me and paralyze me and say, well, I'm not gonna do anything, or living in denial and saying, well, I really, I'm just gonna have faith that I don't have prostate cancer and that Dr. Bishop and Dr. Martinez are wrong. Instead, I let that motivate me to sit down, look at options, and so I ended up having surgery. By the way, I don't know if I've ever told you, this is an amazing story. It's probably more interesting for me than you, but y'all are here, so listen in. I'm scheduled to have my prostate surgery the last week of the year. This was last December. And so Christmas is over, and I'm supposed to have my surgery on Tuesday. Does anybody remember what happened Sunday? The Goliath snowstorm hit. And so I'm ready for surgery. I'm geared up for it, mentally, emotionally, spiritually. I'm ready to do this thing. And Dr. Bishop calls. And he said, sorry, we're going to have to cancel because of the snowstorm. I cannot get out of my drive. I can't get out of my garage, and my drive is like 3-4 feet. We're going to have to postpone your surgery. And I went, great. So mentally, I make that shift. True story. the whole community is shut down. You know, our office is closed. So I get up, typical morning, Tuesday morning, I get up, go in and make the coffee. My phone rings, and it's Dr. Bishop. And he said, Rick, have you eaten breakfast yet? And I'm going, well, that's nice of Dr. Bishop to want to take me to breakfast, but doesn't he know that the snowstorm won't allow it? And I said, no, I haven't. He said, have you had anything to drink? I said, well, I've had a cup of coffee. Was it black or did you put cream? I said, you know, I drink it black, but I put just a little cream. He went, rats. He said, well, we'll work around it. Said, they came and they cleared my road. I can get out of my garage, I can get to the road, and they've got like Humvees that they're getting the doctors to the hospital. And so I can get there, can you? And I said, well, you know what, as a matter of fact, with my new titanium back, I was able yesterday to shovel my drive. And I mean, it was like 3 feet there, the snow drifts. And so I said, yeah, I got that cleared out. I got 4-wheel drive, I can do it. He said, let's go, get there. I said, okay. It was about that pitch. So Mary and I said, Mary, come on. She said, where are we going, breakfast? I said, no. We're going to the hospital. And she said, I said, I'll explain on the way. So, I mean, that's how it happened. So, while you guys are home enjoying breakfast during Goliath, I just celebrated the end of 2015 with another surgery. Now, I tell you that story for a very important reason. There is a moral. I learned an incredibly valuable lesson in my life, and that is, don't be controlled by fear, but don't be afraid to be afraid. Does that make sense? Don't be controlled by fear in an unhealthy, paranoid way, but let fear motivate you. When you see the Egyptian army coming at you, it's normal to be terrified. So don't be afraid to be afraid. But we're not going to stay there, are we? No. We're still trapped at Pi Hahiroth, and we're not afraid to be afraid. But number 2, here's the second challenge. Don't be afraid to cry out. Don't be afraid you're terrified. What's the next thing they do? They cried out to the Lord. I love this part of the story. The Israelites responded to the crisis with the correct follow-up to fear. If you're a Christ follower, what is the appropriate next step after you're terrified? You cry out to the Lord. They cried out in the right direction, which was kind of unusual for the Egyptians. But here in this second, they cried out in the right direction. Now, when you and I are trapped in a Red Sea crisis, we must not be afraid to cry out to the Lord. Ephesians 6:18. Great passage. Look at this. And pray in the Spirit, now watch, on all occasions with all kinds of prayers. Make note of that. With all kinds of prayers and requests. With this in mind, be alert and always keep on praying for all the Lord's people. Isn't that a great verse? All kinds of prayer. Did you know there are different kinds of prayer? Now, one type of prayer is called crying out to the Lord prayer. When do you use this? When you're caught between a rock and a wet place. Did you know that even Jesus used this kind of prayer in his earthly life? Watch this. It's tucked away in Hebrews chapter 5, but don't miss it. Hebrews 5:7. During the days of Jesus' life on earth, he offered up prayers and petitions with fervent cries. Hear that? With fervent cries and tears to the one who could save him from death. And he was heard because of his reverent submission. Boy, have you ever been there? You ever been there where all you could do was just cry out? Well, make sure you cry out to the Lord. Use that kind of prayer. Sometimes you don't even have words. Anybody been there like, oh, man, God, I don't even know what to pray. What do I pray in this situation? God's got you covered there. Romans 8:26. Look at this. Do you guys know this verse? In the same way, the Spirit helps us in our weakness. We do not know what we ought to pray for, but the Spirit Himself intercedes for us through wordless groans. And He who searches our hearts knows the mind of the Spirit, because the Spirit intercedes for who? God's people, that's us, in accordance with the will of God. What a great promise. Here's what we have to understand, guys. We're talking about these Red Sea crises in our life. God allows Red Sea trials. He allows them to invade and interrupt our lives, but not to destroy us. It's to mature us and to grow us. Have you noticed in your life, the trials will drive you to your knees in prayer? Here's the principle that I have learned and I live by. Let's make sure we write this in our notes. We learn to party on the mountaintops, but we learn to pray in the valleys. That's just a fact. You can party on the mountaintops, things are going great, but boy, when you're in the valley, you learn to pray. Okay? By the way, there are hand signals. On the mountaintop, you learn to party. But in the valley, you learn to pray. Some of you are going through a valley right now. Well, learn to pray. Let this be a wonderful opportunity. Rather than just crying out at the circumstance or crying out at the trial, cry out to God. That's what He wants you to do. So when you're trapped at Pi Hahiroth, don't be afraid to cry out to the Lord. Number 3, don't be afraid to trust God. Well, here's where the Israelites dropped the ball. Man, they were moving so well, now the wheels fell off. 2 out of 3. They got number 1, they got number 2, but number 3, when it came to trusting God, this is where they failed. Instead of moving from fear to faith, they allowed their fear to move them toward distrust. And now, you got to hold on to next week. Next week, Moses is going to correct this response, correct their behavior with the next Red Sea rule. But we got to wait. That's next week. But for now, can we take just a moment and look at the dangerous response that Israel made so we don't make the same mistake? What is, and it's what we're going to call the move from fear to distrust. It happened in 3 steps. Watch what happened. The move from fear to distrust. Step number 1 was doubt. Doubt. Look what they said to Moses. Was it because there were no graves in Egypt that you brought us to the desert to die? What are they doing? They're doubting God's control. They're saying, God really in control. God can't get us out of this. God's not leading us to some promised land. You brought us out here in the desert to die. Doubt. Watch out for doubt. It'll lead you in the wrong direction. Step number 2 is blame. Very clearly, blame. They said to Moses, what have you done to us by bringing us out of Egypt? Didn't we tell you in Egypt, leave us alone? We want to serve the Egyptians. Blame. Anybody here ever blame people for your circumstances? Anybody? Yeah, it's one of my favorite things to do. I love to, that's why I have staff. I can just blame it. Blame, anything goes wrong. Lyndall just, yeah. We love to blame. It's always easier to blame others for the circumstances rather than just trust God. Oh, and by the way, very important lesson here. How did Israel get in this situation? Did they sin? Is this the consequence of a bad decision? No. They're following Moses. God's led them to this point. They're doing everything right, and they are in a bad circumstance. Some of you, you may be doing everything right, and you're still going through a rough time. Welcome to planet Earth. Remember, this is not heaven. This is earth, where bad things happen even when we're doing the will of God. Step number 3, self-pity. Self-pity. They say to Moses, it would have been better for us to serve the Egyptians than to die in the desert. Woe is me. You can just hear them groaning. It's the old when in doubt, throw a pity party. Doubt, blame, self-pity. You go down that road, it will lead you to distrust rather than trust. What do we know from Scripture? Hebrews 11:6 says, without faith, it is impossible to please God. Now, we know this intellectually, but man, when you're in a Red Sea crisis, it's tough to remember that. It's tough to live that out when you got fear in the pit of your gut. Wow, it's hard to believe that. You want a great example? The disciples of Jesus, they're in a boat and they're in a crisis, and you would think they would have a lot of faith. Why? Because Jesus is in the boat with them. I mean, he's right there. They can look and say, oh, yeah, there's Jesus right there. Let me read the story. Mark 4, amazing story. That day when evening came, Jesus said to his disciples, let us go over to the other side, that is the Sea of Galilee. Leaving the crowd behind, they took him along, just as he was in the boat. And there were also other boats with them. A furious squall, Red Sea crisis, came up, and the waves broke over the boat so that it was nearly swamped. Jesus was in the stern, sleeping on a cushion. The disciples woke him up and said, teacher, don't you care if we drowned? That's pity party, He got up, rebuked the wind, and said to the waves, quiet, be still. Then the wind died down, and it was completely calm. And he said to his disciples, why are you so afraid? Do you still have no faith? They were terrified and asked each other, who is this? Even the wind and the waves obey him. Quite a story. Guys, even when Jesus is in the boat with you, and intellectually you know I will never leave you or forsake you, when that fear hits, you got to control your fear. Don't let fear control you. If you let fear control you, you'll start doubting God's presence, blaming other people for your circumstances, and start setting the table for your pity party. That's the way it goes. So when you're trapped at Paharov, really, don't be afraid just to say, God, I feel like I'm in your will. I don't feel like I'm here because I did a stupid thing. So I don't know why I'm here, but I know I'm here for a reason. And I'm going to trust you that you will get me through. Because God, I know you. If you lead me in, you will lead me out in your perfect timing. So, what do you think? How do you think you're going to respond the next time you find yourself trapped at Paharoth? Well, don't be afraid to be afraid. And don't be afraid to cry out to the Lord. And for goodness sake, don't forget just to trust him with your circumstance. Remember Red Sea rule number 4. Pray. And now we know how to pray. You know, perhaps one more example of Jesus can help us out. Matthew 26, at the very end of his life, listen to what Jesus did when he went through his Red Sea crisis. Then Jesus went with his disciples to a place called Gethsemane. And he said to them, sit here while I go over there and pray. And he took Peter and the 2 sons of Zebedee along with him. And he began to be sorrowful and troubled. Then he said to them, my soul is overwhelmed with sorrow. Man, that's called being terrified. To the point of death. Stay here and keep watch with me. Going a little further, he fell with his face to the ground and prayed, my Father, if it is possible, may this cup be taken from me, yet not as I will, but as you will. Wow. What's Jesus teaching us here? Don't be afraid to be afraid, but don't be afraid to cry out to the Lord, and don't be afraid to trust your will to His. Live like this. Respond like this. It could be the most Christ-like response you will ever make in your life. Let's bow. Well, Lord Jesus, thank you for giving us the example of how to face a Red Sea crisis. Thank you that even in the Garden of Gethsemane, in the most challenging moment before the cross, thank you that you showed us it's okay to be afraid, and it is perfectly right to cry out to you, and it is the right response to submit our will to you and trust you to work things out. God, thank you for being the God who has the wisdom to lead us into Red Sea trials and the power to lead us out. This is our prayer in the name of Christ. Amen.